And hello, folks. Welcome to Totally Tanked. We are live on YouTube, as you can see us here. It is the 18th of March, 2023. Rob, what episode is this?
Episode 44.
44. We're getting old, which is good. We've lived this long. We have our beer tube courtesy of Clayton. More from Clayton later in the show. Well, Rob, what is the tank we're talking about today?
The T-14 Armata, Object 148. Is a Russian tank. And it's...
Is it?
But we're Totally Tanked, and we're the tankiest podcast in Tankville. And I'm Rob, and you're...
My name's John. Yes.
And we're drinking beer and talking about a tank. Now, the T-14, not T-48, Object 148 or T-14. Is it a magical tank? Is it a mystery tank? Is it a unicorn? Is it a real thing?
I don't think it's a tank. I think it's an armoured utility chassis. Which has a tank module, which is how we end up on the T-14. Let's go further on that. The T-14 is incredibly controversial in tank enthusiast circles and, frankly, in the professional tank community as well. In that the Russians claim this is the best tank in the world, and everyone else is like, it's a technology demonstrator. It's not a tank. You haven't actually got any units with a significant number of them. And these are all valid criticisms, but in terms of an actual physical embodiment of a significant number of design concepts that is supposed to lead into a family of armoured vehicles, it is still worthy of discussion, which is
certainly
why we're here today doing that.
I'll throw in some of my thoughts on that sort of idea. Is the T-64 was also a huge technology demonstrator that did go on to becoming a worthwhile tank in regards that there were a number of them built and achieved a lot of things that weren't around previously. And the T-14 Armata might be similar to that regard, except they've only made 10, 15, however many of them. So we'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, the thousands of T-64s produced, certainly gave it some real heft beyond its dubious career at the start, but it's certainly showing itself to be a very durable tank in 2023 to the surprise of many. I just want to quickly, for those who are on the YouTube feed, give a shout out to folks who are watching. So we got Wi-Fi Soldier from New Zealand, Juicy from Finland. Welcome. I think that's our first Finn on the live feed. Tasman from Sydney, and Alan is in the Totally Tank Logic. Yeah, and Alan's got...
I think he's talking about my T-shirt.
Oh, okay, good.
I'm assuming.
Nice. Okay, all right. Let's move on and talk about the T-14. Now, what I like about the T-14 is the Russians took a very sober view of the failings of Russian armour in the past, and they said, "How are we going to fix the problems of these tanks?" And what you've then got in T-14 is an addressing of the gun elevation and depression in the Soviet era tanks. You've got the ammunition carousel weakness. You've got all the major drawbacks they have addressed. Now the question is whether they've introduced a whole bunch of new drawbacks in the process.
They have. I mean, it's like the S tank, and really is a going outside the traditional concept of, okay, these are the vulnerabilities of a tank, or what do we want to try and achieve for crew survivability? Is crew survivability going to become our main thing? Is the tank survivability? Is the number of tanks we're going to burn? They're going quantity over quality? No, this time they're going for a highly experimental quality tank with a lot of new technologies thrown in there, and to see what they can do with it. And look, is it a demonstrator for overseas sales? Yeah, quite probably, because they can't afford it themselves.
It's not doing very well as a demonstrator.
Not
for
yet,
sales,
not
though.
yet.
Yeah.
But it's tanks have longevity, as per the T-62s being brought out of mothballs at the moment, and more T-62s, I should say, being brought out of mothballs at the moment. Look, to go fight in Ukraine.
I wanted to talk about that in the second half of the show, and we will talk about Ukraine in that part. But the idea that in 2023 they are seriously talking about sending T-62s to the First Guards Tank Army.
Yeah, I was about to say the T-62s have already been in the conflict. It's just a case of
the elite units are having to make do with these ancient tanks now.
And the BTR-50s that were made in the 1950s coming out as well. So anyway, look, a few stats and figures for the T-14 Armata. Designed, eventually signed off for the design in 2014. The prototypes were built between 2014 and 2021. Present version was built from 21 to present. 55 tons, 3 crew. And where are the crews situated, John?
In a funny little row right up the front of the vehicle, looking basically as if they're in the front of a truck doing a delivery run.
Pretty much.
And that actually got me thinking, because it was bugging me enormously. Because having them in that 3 in a row configuration, if you're looking to armour a crew compartment, it's not the most efficient use of armour. Because a line of 3 is not the optimal shape for needing the smallest amount of armour to provide the same level of protection. That's some sort of circular, or when given there's 3 of them, triangular arrangement, and you'd normally put the commander behind and slightly higher so he can look over the shoulders of the crew in front of him.
And what they're doing, and say, stop looking at your phone and get to work.
Yeah, or just, hey, over that way a bit, please. But they've gone 3 in a row, and the reason is because this is meant to be a family of vehicles. It's meant to be a mobile gun system for an artillery piece. It's meant to be an infantry fighting vehicle. It's meant to be an APC.
For carrying flamethrower squads.
It's flamethrower squads. It's very exciting. It's very command and control, isn't it? And in that context, that this is actually a family of armoured utility vehicles, of which one has a tank mode, that makes a lot more sense, and that does explain why they all sort of sit up the front like they're
As soon as I heard the idea of the carrying heavy flamethrower squads, I thought, this sounds like a battle wagon for the Orcs in 40k, and whereby you can, depending on what guns and compartments you put upon the battle wagon, it becomes a truck, it becomes a tank, it becomes an APC, and fill it full of burner boys in the back, and you're laughing. So it's I think some of the Russians must have been looking at that and saying, that's a brilliant idea. Let's follow the Orcs.
I don't know, if you're playing 40k and say, who do I want my real world army to be like, you've got to choose the Tau, don't you? I mean, that's who you want to be.
Anyway, other stats and figures. All right, it's 35 feet long, 11 feet high, 11 feet wide. So it's much taller than all the other Russian tanks, which are usually only around 8, most 8 feet high. So it's got a lot more elevation to the profile in the gun. Still nowhere near, well, actually it's probably equivalent to where the Americans and Western tanks are. 125 millimeter gun with autoloader. Now, it's slightly different. It's the 2A82-1M smoothbore.
Yep. Now it looks superficially very similar to the T90 gun, and it is a 125mm smoothbore, so there is some commonality there. But it is significantly longer. I think more than 10 calibers longer.
And it can take much longer penetrators in it, so much larger rounds.
They fixed the penetrator problem, which came from using the ammunition carousel with the 2-part ammunition. So now they can have
built in the 60s.
Yeah, so now they can have one great big long round that automatically gets slotted in and gives them longer penetrators. Having said that, the penetrator they're currently saying they're going to use in Armata is still shorter than Western penetrators.
Yes.
So they haven't reached parity in penetrator length yet. So yeah, come on, Russia, you can do better.
I see Cornelius has joined us. Welcome, thank you.
Cornelius is here in Canberra, of course. We're probably going to have to get you on the show sometime. Okay.
All right. In the autoloader for the 125mm gun, it carries 32 in the autoloader. It's 45 rounds all up in the tank. Now, one of my big questions for this is, okay, you've got 32 in the autoloader, 45 in the tank. You're in a separate crew compartment from the turret. What happens when you go through those 32 rounds? Does it auto-reload itself? Or do you have to pull out, run away, climb out of your nice armoured compartment, climb into the turret, and do things manually? Nothing's specified.
What do you do if there's a misfire?
Who knows?
Because at the moment, in a Russian crewed turret, yes, it's got an autoloader that's heavily automated, but if there's something goes wrong with the autoloader, the crew are next to it and can belt it with hammers.
And still fire and still load the gun, even though it takes, say, a minute to reload each round rather than the 10 seconds. But you can still get a round off. But if it's you fired your 32 or you got a misfire of some sort, yeah, who knows?
I have a lot of questions for how serviceable the interior of the turret is at all. Obviously, it has to be somewhat because they've got to get another 10 rounds from somewhere in the body of the tank into the system. But yes, it still presents questions, and I believe it does still have a lot of ammunition in the hull of the tank below the turret.
Still in the armoured compartment, so it's still safe.
It's in a different armoured compartment to the crew, though, which is the point of pretty much the whole exercise, really. Yeah.
All right. Still got a 50 cal cord machine gun in a remote operated system on top, and a 7.62 machine gun. So a heavy machine gun in a coax position. It's got 1100 watts engine, no, kilowatt engine, or 1500
horsepower
turbo diesel engine.
Now they've had a lot of problems with the engine.
Yes, just being able to afford them for one.
Well, yeah, the Chelyabinsk tractor factory has been given the task, and we laugh, but Russians have done very well with tractor engines in their tanks historically. But the engine that they currently have apparently is not what they were hoping for in terms of fuel and oil consumption. And the engine that was meant to replace it has turned into a failed project, so they're still just trucking on with the one that isn't great. But engine power packs can be changed.
Yep.
It's getting a little late in the day, but they haven't built that many yet. So do you reckon they've actually built 20 yet, or is that there's definitely 8 of them because they keep rolling those down?
I thought it was 9 that they'd seen shown around. Okay. Got 12-speed auto transmission, supposedly hydropneumatic suspension, but we haven't actually seen any. I haven't seen any video of that being in use.
There's definitely a lot of sources saying it's a hydropneumatic suspension.
There you go. Yeah. It's supposed to have a 500-kilometre range fuel tank. Speeds estimated to 75 to 90 kilometres an hour. Now,
Yep.
And supposedly, John, you're saying you reckon it can do as fast as that in reverse as it can forwards with that 12-speed transmission?
The transmission is set up so that all 12 gears are available in forward and reverse. So it can, in theory, drive at full speed in reverse. Obviously, in practice, there are reasons why you might not want to do that. But it can go very fast in reverse, which again is the Russians addressing a complaint of their previous series of
where
tanks.
their previous maximum
4 miles an hour.
Previous maximum was 11 k's an hour in reverse. Okay, 7 road wheels rather than the usual Russian 6. So this is making it a bit longer. And however, this also makes it for a smoother ride, which is better for target acquisition and firing on the move. So it's actually improving the actual capabilities of the tank by having this longer wheelbase.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, again, we come back to, let's keep mentioning, the Russians have this idea, and I think to some extent they got it from the Indians, because the Indians have, with the T-90, been basically equipping whole divisions with everything running on a T-90 chassis, so that every vehicle in the division can head up over that hill and away together, rather than being like, oh, this one can go this way and that one can go the other way. And there's a lot to recommend that. But it does also bring very big problems in that sometimes if you just want a couple of guys to go up to the top of the hill with a radio, a tank chassis is overkill for that.
But if that's all you've got, then that's what you've got to do it in.
Yeah, but it becomes extremely expensive to do small utility runabout tasks if every single vehicle is a 55-ton armoured vehicle.
Well, that's why you have your BDR 50s to be able to do your running around in there, and they're totally expendable nowadays.
I guess so.
Yeah. So you got 3 parts to the hull. You got the crew compartment forward. You got the unmanned turret to the centre, and the power pack to the rear. Cost estimated around $5.7 million US dollars in 2022 money. It started out at about $4 million back when it was being produced, but as money goes up, it goes up. So it's quite
way too expensive for a Russian army,
especially when you can get a upgraded T-72 for about $500,000. So yeah, it's quite a number of them. Look, the number of them built is unknown. Anybody anywhere can make up numbers, but the point is that we don't know how many physically exist and or what configuration they're in.
I think it's telling there is talk that there's a lot of trouble at the, wait for it, Uralvagon Zavod plant.
Did you say that one right?
Yeah, I did.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, I'll give you that one.
All right. So there is talk that there is trouble at the Uralvagon Zavod tank factory. They are running at a loss that they should not be running at because they have long-term contracts and they should know the cost of their inputs and their outputs. So something's going on there.
They went broke and couldn't build enough, couldn't fulfill their engine contracts.
Yeah, and in theory, the Russians say that all of the systems in this tank are locally produced. And yet I see a lot of flat screens inside the tank. I'm not aware of Russian production of flat screen TVs.
I'm sure they've got it, John. How hard can it be?
How hard can it be to make microprocessors? Yeah, I just and I say, I live in a country that can't make a microprocessor to save its life.
I don't think we can even make a car here in Australia.
We used to make cars.
We don't make cars anymore.
So my point is, I have significant doubts that the Russians have actually got all the systems locally produced.
They claim they have, though.
Yeah.
All right. So the initial plan was to build 2,300 of them, built between 2015 and 2020.
Hey, let's do the math on that. 2,300 of them at 5.5 million. That's a.
It was cheaper back in 2014. Anyway. But they ran out of money and looked like the project was cancelled. But in 2018, the government announced a restart of the project in 2022. But they further delayed it, saying that 40 tanks to be delivered to the army by 2023. Well, guess what? That hasn't happened. So
what I love is that you've started the biggest tank war, well, at least since Eritrea and Ethiopia, but that was very old tanks. The largest modern tank war since Yom Kippur, basically. Since the Gulf War. Let's go with that one.
Yeah. Largest
since the Gulf War. And yet you can't even produce your new tank design to get it onto the battlefield. And you're stuck rehabilitating T-62s that have literally been in a pit.
It's a good way to preserve them. The oxygen doesn't get to them if they're in a pit.
Yeah, I have obviously
Russian tanks could be dragged out of a pit, cleaned up, and started up again. We've seen that.
Can you imagine the conversations in Russia about? So where's this new tank that we've been talking about since 2015? Massive tank war.
That they announced after they annexed the first 3 places of the area.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. The crew compartment now.
I love the thickness of the hatches on the roof.
And the belly.
Yeah, it's got a belly hatch, which I like belly hatches in tanks. It gives a lot of options, and it's even a big belly hatch. But the thickness of the top armour on this tank, as evidenced in the enormous hatches that you'll see in the photos for those watching on YouTube, they're some big, thick, almost like the Churchill. The thickness of those hatches.
10 centimetre.
But no, there's a hatch for the driver. There's a hatch for the commander. Mm-hmm. No hatch for the gunner. No. Although he could sort of mark the belly hatch out of that's where I'm going if things are going bad. You two go up, I'm going down.
I think things are going bad for them. They're probably hoping that their little armoured compartment survives whatever happens and they can climb out of the wreckage is the point.
Yeah, there is the issue when you've got an enormous armoured hatch of whether you can open that hatch after a catastrophic incident.
Which is why you've got one in the belly as well as the top.
Yeah.
It's probably unlikely to happen to both.
Damage to both, I guess. Yeah. You'll
be sitting in the dark and hoping that the NBC systems keep going and actually pumping air in there, because it probably would be. Would it be? I don't know. If it'd be airtime. Anyway, the seating arrangement means seeing the videos of the seating arrangements, it might be that the people they've shown in the videos of inside there are quite small, but it actually looks like there is more room than I thought there would be. I thought that would actually be quite cramped, and if you were stuck in that compartment for a long period of time, you'd actually be uncomfortable. But from when I read about it, but when I started seeing the videos, I said there are actually probably more room to move around there than a driver would normally have. The commander and the loader and the gunner probably have similar to what they would have in a traditional tank.
It literally looks like the cab of an Isuzu truck.
Yeah. But the other thing is, don't worry, they have thought of crew comfort, and they have actually put a chemical toilet in there.
Can you imagine the conversations about that?
That's what you got the belly hatch for.
Okay. I'm just, Captain or Lieutenant, I need to shit. It's like, don't do it in here.
You're gonna have. I mean, you'd have to train
it's a bit like when you're on a long distance bus, and everyone knows you shouldn't use the toilet unless it's an emergency. Just hold on till the next stop unless you absolutely can't, and then it's better for you to use the toilet than to do it in the rest of the bus.
At least they've made the effort. Look, it's got air conditioning, and heating.
Air conditioning for crew. This is something we've been saying should have been standard for years.
Air conditioning and heating and a toilet. I mean, that's actually a sheer luxury for a Russian tank crew.
The Cadillac of and hydropneumatic suspension, in theory, can tension its own tracks, so they're not having to do that. I don't know if they can, but it seems a waste of a hydropneumatic suspension system to not have a automated track tensioning system. Okay, what next, Rob?
All right, Armata comes from the Armata Universal Combat Platform, from the OKR Armament Design Study, just for the... so that's where the name comes from. Usually, as most things Russian, they start off with the object and then give it a number. What I'm waiting to see, though, in future years, where this is the T-14 and we've had the T-72s, the T-80s, T-90s, we'll be getting back round to the T-26s and things that the Russians actually used almost 100 years ago type thing of are they going to keep going with the name and just rename them?
It's an interesting one. I mean, the US with their planes, they had the Century series. And then they said, stuff it, let's just go back to...
naming them.
Well, no, then they basically reset the numbers.
Right.
Which is why the F4 came after the F105.
Okay, yep.
I don't know. I mean, you obviously wouldn't want to put T-34 on something unless you thought it was pretty special.
Ooh, that's that would be a challenge. I think they're going to put that heritage list, that name, and not let anybody play with it.
I'd retire that number myself. Don't know. Russian naming conventions are prone to change at any time, as are everyone's, frankly. So.
All right. So these tanks were unveiled for the first time to the public on the 9th of May 2015 Victory Day Parade. But of course... everybody had a good laugh when during the rehearsals one of them broke down and they couldn't get started and they couldn't tow it away, and eventually somebody came along who actually knew what they were doing and smacked
the brake.
smacked it with a hammer enough that they got it going again, but it was still, for its debut performance on stage, it was pretty embarrassing for them.
Yeah, now my understanding was that literally it had the park brake on, and no one in it knew how to release the brake, and that was actually the issue they had at that moment. Which is always a problem with top secret and new systems, in that how do you actually get the crew who have to use it trained on the top secret systems? And for example, the stabilizer on the M4 Sherman was largely unusable in World War II because none of the crew had the security clearances to access the manuals.
Yes, you're allowed to. It has these things, but you don't know how to use it. They have been mucking around with an unmanned version. It was supposedly deployed in July 2020. It was called the Tachanka B. So again, taking out the crew and just having a drone driving around like a drone and firing off the rounds. And
yeah, I mean, my problem with unmanned is that either you have communication link and someone just operating it remotely like it's a battle bot.
Mm.
This
this thing relies on so much electronics
Yeah.
and communications. Then why wouldn't you just say, you know what, take the people out of it and do it from somewhere else?
But you have a few problems.
You're not broadcasting that, I guess.
Yeah, your problem with running as a battle bot in limited niche situations, like if you really need to go up and bust a bunker or something that's firing back, then it definitely has some merit to take the people out and be able to send the trundle the thing forward. But it takes up an enormous amount of very valuable communication spectrum on the battlefield. And it's not the sort of thing you can have a fleet of 1,000 of them being remotely operated, because in a contested space, when the enemy's electronic warfare is in full cry, you're just not going to be able to communicate with that intensity.
And, well, you hope that whatever electronic warfare your enemy's doing isn't going to affect the internal communications of your tank, because then you're going to be really stuffed.
And the trouble for enthusiasts like us talking about electronic warfare is, we don't know for sure, and we're not going to see until there's an actual war and some actual reports as to what works and how it works. But even the people using it, it's like, oh, gee, I really hope my electronic warfare is working and that the enemy isn't going to get a lock on me at any second. And it creates a lot of terrifying uncertainty, whereas, 120 millimeters of hardened steel, it's hardened steel. Well, you hope, unless it turns out your tank doesn't have the hardened steel, which has happened to tank crews.
All right, we have a number of variants. You got the T-14 heavy infantry fighting vehicle with the 57mm unmanned turret and can carry some troops. You got the command variant. You got the recovery vehicle variant, and then you got the heavy personnel carrier, as I said, for carrying the flamethrower squads. Now, and there's also the 2S-35 Kol-Itziv something rather, it's a self-propelled gun. I didn't look up too much about that, sorry, so I don't actually know what sort. I'm assuming it's a 155, but it could be a 207 style gun. Who knows? The Russians claim they have deployed them for testing in Syria.
Yeah, there's also claims they didn't do very well in Syria.
That they got of the three of them deployed there, one of them got taken out. Again, photos didn't happen, so that's pretty much where the Western world is with these sort of situations of a case of we don't know.
There is a huge issue with the design of this tank, that the situational awareness of the crew in their little bunker at the front is poor and reliant on apparently indigenously designed cameras and monitors. And again, we're not using a Russian-built camera to record this video. I don't use any Russian-built electronics, and if they made good stuff at a good price, I would, but it's not an area of excellence in Russia. And there are many things Russians are really good at, but...
Or even the puppet states like Slovenia, who...
Slovenia?
Yeah.
What's your problem with Slovenia then?
Nothing.
Okay.
Have you seen their flag?
Yeah, but they're not a Russian puppet state.
They're closely aligned. Closely aligned. Anyway, my point is, they've taken over the white goods market of Europe, building other people's designed white goods, which I thought, I shouldn't say too much about there. I don't actually know anything about Slovenian politics, except I look at their flag and say, that looks like a bloody Russian flag to me. So I retract all those previous statements, but they have taken over the white goods market. So your dishwashers.
So when we say white goods, sorry,
we're talking dishwashers, we're talking fridges and so forth of Europe, building the Scandinavian designs, but the actual factories are actually in Slovenia. So there you go. Maybe that's about the closest thing that I can think of in that would qualify as that sort of stuff in my household.
Yeah. Anyway, it's relying on a Russian camera and a Russian monitor to show me what's on the camera to try and know what's happening in the world outside the vehicle that I'm tucked into as because my government can't afford artificial intelligence to drive the tank. Not that anyone's got an autonomous tank at this point, so that's not a huge diss on the Russians.
Let's face it,
ChatGPT can...
Number 8 will soon be out, I'm sure, and they'll be able to...
It can pass a law degree and do an MBA, so,
So we can get rid of all those MBAs.
All the MBAs out.
You're gone, you're sacked.
Yeah, what's actually funny is that someone I know quite well has actually been using ChatGPT to write her MBA essays. She doesn't just hand in the ChatGPT. She does.
I got mine from a packet of cornflakes, and it's done me well in the last 20 years.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk more about this tank. The turret has what looks like, when you see the Victory Day parade things, enormous weird cutouts in the turret, and it's like, what are you trying to get the enemy shells to ricochet? I was about to say
you're building some shot traps into the actual turret.
Yeah, or they literally look like windows, and it turns out that most of these weird cutouts are there's actually sensors behind them, and they've got little retractable doors when they want to use the sensors. And with an unmanned turret, I guess it doesn't matter as much if you're putting holes in your turret.
It's still a shot trap whereby anything that hits in that area will get directed into
you're not going to ricochet.
Yeah, it's not going to go bounce out away from the tank. It's going to bounce into the tank.
Yeah, and I mean, in the pictures that we've got going for those on YouTube, the turret exterior looks like very thin, flimsy steel has been riveted onto that thing.
Well, I'll go into this. Yeah.
Apparently, it is the real armour is further inside, it's just an exterior cladding mostly that we're seeing in the pictures.
Probably. So you got your special advanced steel alloys to reduce the weight of the armour. So again, modern steel rather than from.
Apparently, it's a super steel, Rob.
Of course, it is. No,
everyone's using super steel in their tanks, and sorry.
Why not?
There's just a limit to what you can do with steel, and the limit to how much better you can make it.
We've been improving the way we've used steel for the last 1,500 years. I mean, it's not like you can't keep on doing it now that we've got new technologies.
Yeah, but my point is that really good armour involves, exotic sandwiches of depleted uranium
which they have supposedly actually done. So rather than actually building just a straight steel hull and then whacking bricks of ERA on top of it, I've got to get this right. Sorry.
Well, it's okay.
I've got to find my basically
champagne television here.
All right. So my notes. If anybody's actually ever seen my notes, they are a scribble like a mile.
I got hold them up to the camera, Rob. I'm gonna love it. This is how we make the magic happen, folks.
This is scribble. All right. This is a couple of hours worth of note taking. Anyway, so the actual steel of the hull has ERA built into it, so it's not just straight steel.
The malachite.
Yes, malachite.
The malachite ERA. So instead of looking like it's wearing a quilt, the explosive reactive armor is actually built into the body of the tank, which if it's there and it works, is good. So
the ERA is built into the armor plates, not just added as bricks on top of the outside of the steel. So that's part of the protection factor. It's a dual explosive ERA. So it's supposed to take out your dual warhead.
Take out the tandems.
Tandem warheads. So first is the penetrator, then explosion, or whatever it is, or first takes out the ERA, and then the penetrator goes through and hits the actual hull. It's supposed to be able to deal with both of those things. And also with the tank's protection system, it's got the Afghanet active protection system. So
okay, I've been waiting to talk about the Afghanet.
So whereas most tanks usually have a passive system whereby, okay, you've detected a laser system highlighting your tank, you pop smoke and you pull out of there or whatever else, or an active or a hard kill system whereby a round is detected incoming to your tank, and then you fire off a shotgun of explosives towards the direction of the incoming round, and it contacts it and blows it up. This has the Afghanet is both systems, both the the passive and hard kill. So it can do both, as in detect. It'll detect both of them at the same time.
Now, also apparently on the subject of electronic warfare, and let's bear in mind my loud and long arguments with the chieftain in the pub about electronic warfare's value in tanks. Apparently, the Russians are saying that the Afghanet system can also detect vulnerable electronics in incoming missile rounds and mess with them.
Figure out whether or not it's infrared line of sight or heat seeking,
but also,
and say, okay, I know what you're looking for, and counter that particular mode.
Yeah, or even if it's got a radar receiver, mess with the radar receiver, again, you would need a third party to tell you whether it actually works. And the other thing, if there's a few things worth mentioning, you will notice if you look closely that the Armata turret has a series of tubes underneath it, and those are what fires the active protection system countermeasures. And it's got a lot of them. It probably has more shots than the trophy system, which the Israelis have made that everyone's using.
They're also designed to cover the top of the tank. Tasman's made a point of, yes, it does only protect the front half of the tank.
120 degrees, yeah.
I thought it was 180 to the front.
Okay,
I thought it was 90 and 90. So
I'm not going to die in a ditch show that is between 120 and 180.
But the front half of the tank. So yeah, you can still get your passive kills from the rear. I guess it was just too hard to fire off all those things in 360 degrees. So yes, and welcome Kingsley. I don't think we've called you out before. So welcome to the site.
Kingsley wants to know what colours it comes in. It comes in green. Mate. It's an army tank. They all come in green.
All the Western tanks coming in from Poland and the US and so forth are coming in desert cam though for the Ukrainians.
Sexy ones, yeah. Okay, now a few more things about Afghanet that are really worth talking about. It reckons it can disrupt an incoming kinetic penetrator up to 1,700 meters per second.
Yes, Mark 3 or something it is.
Which is an interesting point to claim it can do it, because most kinetic penetrators move at 2,000. A little bit higher than 1,700 meters.
They're looking to get that push that up until it's about 3,000 meters per second. So Mark 8, which is where which should cover everything for you. But just remember, this is looking at you're looking at your tank rounds coming in. You're looking at RPGs, anti-tank missiles, the anti-tank guided missiles, artillery rounds, air-to-surface missiles from planes or helicopters, any of those sort of things. So it is trying to cover all of those aspects of protection.
But it would be absolutely revolutionary if an APS could knock out an incoming kinetic penetrator. That is serious game-changing territory.
They claim they can take out Western penetrators.
Because you don't need to do much. You don't need to do much. Admittedly, you hit it, the kinetic penetrator is still going to hit you. But if you can just change the axis of the penetrator slightly, put a little bit of tumble on it.
Yep. It's that the point of the dart's not going to hit, and if the point of the dart doesn't hit square on, then it's probably going to get messed up pretty badly. So.
Yeah, it would be a really big deal. Even the Russians aren't claiming they can do it yet, and we all know that there's a world of difference between what the Russians claim they can do and what they can actually do. Although I would say we can make the same complaint about Western weapons companies too.
We'll get to talk about those a little later on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And the Malachite ERA is 4th generation. So very special stuff there. Look, with your...
Well, I'm going to miss the era of tanks covered in pillow blocks of ERA. It certainly makes it harder to visually know how damaged the tank is. Like, when at the start of the Ukraine war, you could look at a Soviet tank and see where it had blown off bits of its... Although I'm willing to guess that if Armata has blown off chunks of its ERA, that'll be very obvious to look at too. So... I guess we're not losing anything there. I will still miss the pillows, though.
Oh, look, with your... where's the place again, John?
Ural Vagon Zavod.
Yeah.
So
they
it's Ural, which is the mountains, the Urals. Okay.
Yep.
Then Vagon, because it's a wagon. And then just a Zavod at the end. Ural Vagon Zavod.
All right. All right.
We can do this by tackling it in small chunks.
All right. So at that factory, they built the T-55, the T-62, the T-72, and the T-90, but not the T-64 and the T-80s, which were probably built
Kharkiv.
Kharkiv factory. But we've discussed it previously about the politics of the Russian tank manufacturing, Soviet tank manufacturing politics of who's going to build what tanks, what resources they get, and so forth. So the fact that it's at the big one, it really says that they're not getting enough money for them.
Now, Rob, we've got a comment that we need to address. Underwater is saying, I imagine two 25-year-old surfers. Ha! We fooled you. We're glad you're not complaining.
I do surf.
Yeah, we do surf.
I took my dog surfing last weekend. It was fun.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on.
All right. Special advanced steel armors reduce the weight of the armor. It makes it more reliable in hot and cold environments. Now, this was one of the things I saw. They kept making points of one. Yeah, they wanted to test it in hot and cold environments. Russia's full of cold environments, so that's one of the things they wanted to take to Syria so they could test it in a hot environment. But one of the other ones they mentioned was it's been tested for working under the Aurora Polaris or the Northern Lights. And I kept saying, well, why do they keep mentioning that? Well, I had to look it up and say, yes, it does. The Northern Lights do interfere with your electronics, your GPS, and your communications. And so they've tried to counter all those things by putting the tank.
I would say it's the solar ejector that caused the Northern Lights. It also messes with the things rather than saying... Anyway, I'm splitting a fine distinction there.
But the point being is that that the Russians have made an effort to say, yep, these are conditions that we might find this tank in, and we're going to make an effort to counter them and deal with them.
On the subject, I don't know if we've said it in this podcast before, but talking about artificial intelligence, there was a very famous case study in the field of AI. Trust me, it's tank related, where they asked an artificial intelligence to look at lots of pictures of tanks and then figure out if it could identify which ones were Russian tanks. Obviously, if you can teach a computer to know which tanks are Russian tanks, that's very handy for...
Unlike Pavlov's dogs.
Yeah, it's very handy for sending that computer out at the end of a missile to destroy Russian tanks. And they thought they'd done a really good job. This AI was really picking out those Russian tanks with great reliability. And then when they actually looked into what it was doing, it was just looking for which tanks were photographed on snow. And then just assuming any tank on snow was a Russian tank, which is less useful on the battlefield than
those Canadian Leopard 2s are just All right. Other fun things. They're looking for overseas sales. Of course, they've been.
Yeah, no one's buying it.
They're pushing it pretty hard at their various tank lineup. Shindigs where they bring in a lot of overseas diplomats and say, look at all our shiny new tanks. Would you like to buy one of these? And so they're courting the Chinese, the Indians, the Algerians, possibly Kuwaitis or United Arab Emirates. And they've also usually got a market in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, but nobody's buying. Nobody stuck their hand up and say, I want some of these tanks.
If I was the Chinese or the Indians, I'd be saying, I think we can have a fair crack at building something better for ourselves.
Well, the Indians didn't.
Obviously, the Indians have had problems. We've talked about that with Arjun. But, the Indians are also, hopefully, if I was the Indians, I would be taking the hard lessons learned in the Arjun project and rolling that into my next Indigenous tank project. And until I see the Russians actually buying an enormous number of their own tanks, I wouldn't want to be the customer funding that.
No,
we could talk about this philosophy with submarines, Rob. But in fact, in the second half of the show, we might.
I think we might. There's been some stuff happening here in Australia the last week about submarines that we might have to talk about.
The stupidest thing Australia's ever done, and we are a country that has done some stupid things, but we've outdone ourselves this week. Okay, let's stay on the text.
Stay on the text. All right. Okay, the big speculation is when and if they will ever be deployed properly to Ukraine in a combat role. Now, this is
the gaping hole of a question in Ukraine. Is like, why aren't the Russians sending their supposedly great tank, best tank in the world, into the war that they are losing?
Against T-64s.
Yeah.
It really is a big question. And look, they've shown photos of it running around the back areas of Donbass, way away from the front lines.
There might have been one acting as a command vehicle, which would actually be a really good test of the command vehicle variant.
But they're not pushing anything forward anywhere can it be possibly exposed.
Anywhere a dude with the javelin might put his crosshairs on it.
Or any sort of drone could see it. And we know this because if it had been deployed, the Russians would be talking about it.
Oh, we'd have heard no end of it. Yeah.
So look, there's a lot of good reasons for them not to do it. One, if one of them does get blown up or
captured by a Ukrainian farmer,
dragged off by
a tractor,
then there's such bad publicity. Look, the other big point you've got to look at is. If you give this tank to a bunch of 19-year-old conscripts, Russian soldiers, the likelihood of those things happening is quite high, and you really, really don't want to have that happen. That's the problems that you've got. You might
at the same time, Rob. I mean, for God's sake, the First Guards Tank Army have been pulling down the big bucks. Like they literally get paid significantly more than everyone else in the Russian army. If they can't be trusted to safely operate one of these vehicles and safeguard it, what is the point of them as a guards army?
But do you think Vlad's trusting anybody in the army these days? Now, my next question is, will we see it being given to Wagner Group in order for them to run the prize around? At which point it becomes a different ball game in a lot of different ways. Saying, "Yep, it wasn't Russia that was there wasn't the Russian army that lost this thing. It was Wagner Group." So there's opportunities for Vlad to knock them down a little bit, but at the same time, Wagner Group might say, "Well, here's us doing the things, and being a private military, we can do these sort of things. And if we come back into various African countries, we might bring these with us, and look what we could do for you as a." As a mercenary company. So,
yeah, I mean, tanks have not to date been economical for mercenaries.
But if they're being properly state-sponsored like Wagner Group is... Then...
Sure, but you know, I mean, because the one thing about mercenaries is they want to make a buck, so they're always doing, you know, the best bang for the buck with their purchasing decisions. But the call on mercenaries has been limited in recent times. You probably have to go back to the 30 Years' War to see mercenary companies operating the heaviest weapons of their day.
Or Africa anywhere in the last 40 years.
Yeah, but even then, you haven't seen too many mercenaries operating armour.
We're pretty sure the T-64s turning up in Uganda was probably...
Okay.
Wagner Group's been getting around, and we just haven't known about it. The little green men, as they're called.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. All right. State-of-the-art stealth technology. Oh, sorry.
Magic paint! Magic paint, Rob!
Magic paint. I was actually sorry. I should have. This section should be under the other fun part of the T-14 Armata is the memes that go with it. Whenever you see a video of it online, the comments underneath the videos, some of them are hilarious. So yes, state of the art stealth technology. No one has seen one on the battlefield.
Yeah, it's very stealthy. I want to talk on stealth just very quickly. They
have made an effort.
Yeah, but it's reasonably well known now in declassified circles that what makes stealthy is not magic paint. It is a shape that deflects the radar away from the radar receiver. That's why things are stealthy. And the T-14 might have some magic paint that doesn't... if it doesn't diffuse heat, if it doesn't expel heat, then the heat is building up in the tank, and that overheating inside a tank is a bigger problem.
Now,
so
they've said
heat is going somewhere from this tank.
You know, they've said they put most of the heat things internal to the tank and basically shield it, so it's not as big a heat signature. And even the exhaust for for the diesel is they've tried to shield that and basically point it down and away from the tank. So again, they have made an effort.
You can do things to reduce the immediate heat signature of your vehicle, but fundamentally, if you're operating a very energetic vehicle, it is generating heat, and you either cook the people inside it.
But if you're sitting still with the engine going in an ambush position, you are much lower risk of being spotted.
Yeah, particularly if the exhaust is under the berm you're hiding behind, and things like that. I'm happy to concede that point. But fundamentally, magic paint isn't going to stop the problem that you're in a hot thing and it's going to be hot. And anything you do to make
especially in a cold environment, the hot things stand out no matter what.
Yeah, but anything you do to reduce the heat output of your vehicle means the inside of the vehicle is hotter.
Yeah, but that's at the back of the tank. Whereas,
but I mean, at what point does you heat it up till the steel melts, or the ammunition cooks off?
There will be ways the heat sinks to get reduced, get the heat out of the tank.
Somewhat. And the other point on stealth. The other point on stealth is that all those cutaways in the turret. Yes, bits of the turret have what might be stealthy aspects to them. Those cutaways are just like they can ricochet an incoming round. They can ricochet a radar signature. Those are not stealthy, and they, a radar signal that gets into those is going to give a very big return.
I'm just loving the way this poll is going over the last hour, John. The numbers
we're up to 18 votes.
And the thing is, look how the numbers are trending. Mm-hmm. We're convincing people how good this tank is.
The initial response was that everyone thought it was bad, and now a few people have said it's good, which I don't know if it's how convincing.
I definitely think it's how convincing. Anyway, other memes. It's designed with the armor is designed with double uranium, polonium, low oxidized armor, or Duplo. This helps the tank to stay modular, as bricks can be clicked in or out, and if you step on them, they really hurt. The most advanced parade tank ever designed. Crews don't want them. Oh, hang on. And the crews that don't want them as they break down and no one is trained enough to fix them quickly, as we saw with the parade thing. So, there are some fun memes there that I found. I thought, no, we'll keep going from that one.
Right.
Oh, one of the other fun ones I saw is there was a video talking about the T-14. And they were showing various interiors and exteriors of tanks and so forth. And then suddenly I had to stop and say, hang on a second, was that the Chieftain? And I scrolled back through the video of the tank and there was the Chieftain sitting inside a tank. I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure the Russians have not let Nicholas Moran, Lieutenant Colonel in the US Army, inside one of their T-14s. And I think it was just one of those moments of saying...
The devil will ice skate to work before the Russians let Nicholas Moran in a T-14.
But it was just one of those moments. All I could see was the side of his eye, and he just turned slightly, and I'm thinking to myself, that's the Chieftain.
I hope he lives long enough that he can drive one in a museum. That would be great. I hope I get to drive in a museum too.
Have somebody else drive us, John. We don't. We can't.
I want to graduate, Rob. I want us to get to the point of driving the damn things.
I think we need to spend more time with Lottie then.
Yeah.
I reckon if she'll.
Well, our friends at South Gippsland Tank Adventures are our.
I think we need to now. Tony, our friend Tony from down that way, will be probably up here in 2 weeks. So we'll have to organise with him for a trip down there next year.
Yes, South Gippsland, we're coming for you.
Yeah. So
have a think about your promotional opportunities with us.
All right. As other points with the T-14 is that having a very advanced tank, and the Western countries have all already found this as well and been caught out with it time and time again. It means you have to have a very good supply chain and support for your spares, for your trained personnel, for your operators, and everything along the way of building that tank. You can't just build a demonstration model and say, we're going to roll this out and make it happen.
For this thing to work, the whole family needs to be built out, and you need to have the whole army using it. And then that's when the fact that you've got this standard chassis across all your vehicles starts to pay dividends. If it remains a niche vehicle, nothing in its design makes any sort of sense. It's a little bit like how the F-35, sometimes known as the Joint Strike Fighter, the A and the C versions carry the design legacy of the V-STOL B version, the vertical short takeoff and landing B version. So the compromises for one part of the common family of vehicles carry through to the whole lot. Yes.
Yep. Sorry, I was just laughing at Cornelius' comment there. The racing stripes would make it. Yes. Yeah.
It has racing stripes. It's got these. Oh, what is with this orange logo? Is that the Russian Army's new thing?
I don't know.
Anyway.
All right. And the point for that was the Russian Army and their tanks, especially, are known for their rugged utility and bare bones.
Yeah, not anymore.
Bare bones tanks, and that's what they're known for. And this tank has leapt away from it. Even the T-64 probably had more support and impetus behind it than the T-14. It was just as much as a demonstrator and concept and technology advancement as the T-14 at the time when it was brought out and was designed, but the T-14 doesn't have any of those commonalities and abilities to go with it. So all your T-62s, 64s, 72s, 80s, 90s, so little in common with the T-14 that all the logistics train.
No, you have to move the whole army over to
everything,
the new...
everything. And when you've already got 3,000, however many or whatever tanks there are, why are you going to do this with for the 14, 15, 20, maybe
they need
chassis that you've got?
They have to place an order to equip an entire division before any of this makes sense.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing to do that, then they probably need to go with a different way forward.
And as we discussed with the T-64, this level of advancement, you can where the operators of the T-64 were coming in and jumping in it, and some of those guys had trained on T-34s 20 years earlier. Suddenly they're jumping into this modern tank with an autoloader and everything else and all these complicated bits. That's what you're asking the operators of the T-72s and the T-90s now, is that you're going from a tank that you've known for the last 20 years and suddenly you're doing something that's electronic that you have no knowledge, no capabilities. You might have some doctrinal knowledge of how to use it, what it does and how it works within the organisation. But physically, it's a totally different thing, and you've got to have the knowledge, the higher level knowledge of doing that. And you're not going to get that in the conscript army.
No, but you also have the significant point that was explained to me, it must have been in my 20s, so a very long time ago, by someone who knew what they were talking about, said the quality of the system is less important than the quality of the simulators. Right? So if you have really good quality simulators, then your tank crew or your aircraft crew or even anti-tank weapons, they have simulators for. It is very cheap to train people in simulators. It is very expensive to train people in the real vehicle. And simulators, I'm not saying, are a substitute for proper exercises. You need to do both. But if people can spend their time learning out what does this switch do in the simulator, that is a lot cheaper than having them driving around in the real vehicle. And all the Russian gear has suffered from the fact that their simulators are nowhere near as good as the Western, let's be honest, we're talking really American simulators. And this is no small thing. Particularly, you want people to build up expertise. You want them to know how to do bank shots off the corner and just crazy stuff that people will think up. But they need an opportunity to test it and practice it. And if you've only got 9 of these vehicles, then no one will ever learn how to make the best of it.
And not only that, is that if you've got a conscript army that is going through, you've only got them for realistically 9 months. You're not going to build up any sort of that capability in a long-standing activity. We've
argued with the Swedes before that conscripts have no place in tanks, and they say, yes, they do. But there is so much specialisation and things you can learn with time doing it. And we have a community of M60 veterans, who listen to us, and one of the things they bring up is just that it may or may not have been the best tank in the world, but they had a lot of time to learn how to use it. Yeah. Have you got more to say on the T-14 before we...
It's a so much more.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, the official word is they're not fully tested. They are experimental industrial, which means they're testing it on operations. And one of the things is we've got some feature creeps for it. So they've already provided. The Russian Army's already provided ideas for what they want in the future for this tank. A dedicated recon drone attached to the
straight
tank.
out the Rheinmetall Panther 2. Yep.
Okay, we've got the 152mm gun. So again, upgunning it. They did look at it's the turret ring is actually at least built for the 152mm gun. They decided not to do that because commonality won, and the 125mm gun
it's a whole new ammunition type though. What commonality do they reckon they're getting?
It can still fit the old stuff.
You can use the old stuff.
Yeah, but the point is that they don't have to have a new. They don't have to have a new logistics train to supply them. So it can, and it does. The 125 still does everything they want it to do. So they don't need to upgun it yet, but they could when they want to. They want thermobaric ammo. They want supersonic ammo.
They've got supersonic ammo.
They want.
Hang on. Thermobaric ammo, you say?
Yeah.
So they want the penetration cum blast that the Indians enjoy.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, they do.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, we haven't actually talked about the gun on this, so it's accurate out to 2Ks, as they say.
Every tank gun in the world, yeah.
Yeah, but it has lower, because it's high velocity, it has lower movement.
Lower drop,
over that period of time, over that distance. It has one anti-tank guided missile out to 5 kilometres and another out to 12. So it's got a new range on it there.
It just comes a point when you're dealing with these long-range missiles where the question is this actually useful to have this in a tank? If you want to do that kind of long-range fire, there are probably other vehicles that would be more suitable.
But they're not as protected, so they're not up the front where they're being shot at by helicopters.
If you're firing 12 kilometres, you don't need to be that.
Well, you're firing at helicopters that might be hurting you. They want anti-tank guided missiles that are fire and forget, so they don't have to keep aiming them in. They want improved target detection out to 6+ kilometres. So while they've got target detection and identification out to, I think it's about 4 kilometres now, supposedly. They want further distances than that. They and a new system to remote deactivate anti-tank mines. So if you're coming into your minefield, you can press a button and say, deactivate all the anti-tank mines in front of me, so I can advance through that area. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, that sounds to me like,
and I hope it works, because if it doesn't, you're a little bit of
but also if the enemy gets hold of the authentication code to deactivate all the mines, that would be useful.
I don't know how you do that, but
I am not sure I want to deploy a minefield that can be deactivated with a.
I actually like
a cyber attack
as wanting to be able to have mines that aren't collected at the end of wars. The ability to just go out there and deactivate them at the press of a button, and not have some poor little rat having to go around, sniff them out, and dig them up in Cambodia.
The giant rats.
Yeah, I know. But the point being is that not being able to press a button and turn them all off, rather than having somebody go out and having to dig them up.
No, but I mean, one thing I did like that the Soviets did in the Cold War was they actually had tanks that were mines that were biodegradable, so that they were after about 6 months they sort of rotted into the ground and ceased to be useful mines.
These were their air deployed mines, so totally illegal in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, let's talk about cluster bombs for a bit, shall we? Yeah.
All right. And one of the things with the as with the T-64 and how it's provided a lot of capabilities that were then brought into the T-72, there is speculation that the advancements the T-14 is seeing will be brought into another tank that is cheaper, more rugged, more easily operated. And the name going around for that one is the Burlak.
Yeah.
Which the indication 2 minutes of Google searching has said to me that they're looking at taking a T-80 chassis and putting the T-14 Armata turret on top of the T-80 chassis with some added
Where are you going to put the crew?
Unsure.
Okay.
I haven't really looked at it.
Yeah.
But so that being the idea of basically you've already got existing hulls, you've already got an existing engine, you've already got existing supply chain for that hull and capabilities, and then you are introducing the advanced aspects of the T-14 onto that, so you've got something that's more rugged, reliable, known, and you've got the numbers to be able to do it with. So,
look, they might well do it, but it would be
and it's cheaper.
The design concepts of the T-14 are very sound, and I mean, I don't, particularly if they're invading Ukraine, I don't have any great love of the Russians or a need to see them do better, but
no.
In general terms, they would be better off making T-14 work rather than retrograding to a T-80 package. In my personal view.
Yeah,
for what that's worth.
What they can afford, what they can do. Yeah, all those sort of questions put together. And I think, John, I finally come to the end of my scribbled notes.
Okay,
and
nice one.
Yes, and we will be back soon.
Okay, so we're going to take what we're going to do right now is we're going to play the video that our friend Clayton made about the building the PZ-38T model,
which I wish I'd seen before I started putting mine together, because it explained a lot of things that I did not know.
Okay. So Clayton's given us permission to share his video in this stream, which, cheers, mate. Also, thank you for saying we're the best tank podcast in the world.
That was so touching and nice.
That's all great. So we're going to give you 30 minutes of Clayton, and then we will be back to talk about what's happening in Ukraine, some other things in tanks, and beer review, and we are going to discuss the whole AUKUS submarine thing, because we are Australians with an interest in military affairs, and so we'll give you a little bit on that, not too much. But so folks, here's Clayton. And we're back.
We're back. Thank you, Clayton, for that video. For our audio-only listeners, you will have you won't have had half an hour of quiet time. You will just cut it straight over. Unfortunately, being such a visual medium, we're not going to include Clayton's demonstration of what the Panzer T-38C
T for check.
In there, so you won't. But feel free to go to the YouTube version to be able to see what we've been talking about. Why have we got the bad guys up?
We're going to talk about that.
All right.
That's to do with Nord Stream.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, hang on.
So hang on. Let's talk a bit more. We've got Oliver has asked when are these models due? Look, Rob has started construction on his PZ-38T. I have not bought mine yet, so I'm...
John's just moved house, so he's got a lot of things going on.
I have just moved house. So, and yes, I have had a lot of things going on. So, I would say you've probably got, let's even say 2 months on the build phase. Although, as Clayton's just showed us, there's a lot of painting you can do while you're building to make life easier for yourself.
Wish he'd brought that out just before I actually spent my 2 hours putting my bits together, because there's so many things that I did not know what I was doing and where it was going, because it's following an actual kit and with directions and so forth, rather than just bashing it together myself, which is what I'm used to doing. And if I'd seen that, I'm still going to make something. It's going to look like a tank. I'm going to have fun with it, and depends, as he says, it's all about your own personal experience with it all.
Yeah. But I would say let's aim for sometime in May for everyone to have built the tank.
May offensive.
Yep. And then
May's a good time to invade France.
It is. It's the best time to invade France. Any time's a good time. Anyway. May to build, and then we will have another 2 months for the painting. But do please, I know a bunch of you have bought the model. Send in some photos, even if you've only just put one drive wheel together or something. Do send them through. We'll share them on our social media. We can all be part of this thing together. That's the idea. Anyway. Some brilliant ideas for how to do model tank construction in that video. That was awesome, Clayton. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's like, I could just put a blue tack and toothpick and then I can paint the road wheel without getting my fat fingers all over.
Where was that when I needed it? Anyway.
Yeah.
Now,
things
John,
we want to talk about in the...
John,
yes.
you need to deal with that.
Deal with what?
That.
My beer?
Yes. Right. So we can get on to something else.
Ooh.
It's called...
Beer Review!
All right. So we have filled the beer tube with the T-14 being a fantastical unicorn of a tank.
Non-existent.
Yeah. I decided I couldn't find any Russian beer in Australia. What a surprise. So I decided to go for the Furphy Crisp lager. A easy drinking lager because lagers aren't easy enough to drink.
The lagers are tough and you need an easy one.
Now, for those who don't know and haven't listened to our April 1st episode...
Soon to be more relevant. Yes.
The Furphy in Australian slang is a tall tale or a exaggerated story, and they've come out and made a beer about it. And if you want the full history about the Furphy company, you'll go listen to our April 1st episode. However, the T-14 being a fantasy tank that doesn't really exist, I thought, and I couldn't find any Russian beer, therefore I decided to go for a different Furphy beer. This is the crisp, as I said, rather than the normal Furphy. So this is what we're drinking today.
Yeah, look, this is a macro brewery lager that gets sold at a craft beer premium.
So $20 a six-pack, which is not too much.
Yeah, but anyway.
Now,
it's just another macro brewery lager, and this one is the crisp means less flavour in beer brewing, and I mean, my daily drink's Victoria Bitter, so yes, Laser Pig, that's me, not Perun. Yeah. We're still waiting for Laser Pig to agree to be on the show. I've noted the irony that the chieftain is happy to be on the show, and when we do the M1, we will involve him. But Laserpig thinks he's better than us.
Of course he is, John. Scottish.
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to the Furphy beer. Now, for those who don't know, in Australia, these short little bottles are traditionally called stubbies. Now, we don't actually see this shape of a stubby very often these days in Australia. There's usually the longer necked beer bottles, which are usually 330 or 350. This being actually 375 proper stubby.
Yeah.
Now, they're called stubbies because back in the 70s, we had you either had long necks, which is your 750s,
what's the problem with this beer bottle, Rob?
It's thin glass, I'm assuming. What?
Clear glass.
Clear glass.
What happens with clear glass?
It starts bushfires.
The ultraviolet destroys the hop oils in the beer.
There you go.
So
nothing I knew.
No serious quality beer will ever be sold in a clear glass bottle, and that is it's fine. It's an easy drinking lager, just like it says on the tin. And hey, I like drinking easy drinking lagers. I'm not going to have a go at that. But my top tip for beer drinkers listening to us or watching the video is that if you see beer sold in clear glass, it is a low quality beer because the ultraviolet will destroy the flavors. So you want brown or green glass, or even better, a can. Controversial, yes. Cans are better for high quality beer than glass bottles.
There you go. Things I did not know about the beer industry. But anyway, as I said, I thought it was strange that John has this absolute hatred of the 330ml bottles. And
it's a rip-off. They sell them in 330s and charge you the same price as the 375.
And this is the 375. And as I said, the Australian slang for a short, stubby bottle like this is called a stubby, rather than the long necks, which is where they've come from previously. And it is a 375, which is surprising for what they fit in there.
It's a very compact bottle. I'll give them that.
Yeah, as I'm saying, it must be thin glass because it does not feel any bigger than another bottle that is 330 or anything else, especially with a shorter neck on it. So you say to yourself, well, where is the extra volume to fit that in? But so there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those who are wanting to know, that's what the beer we've got today is.
Anyway, Furphy Crisp Lager is a cheap beer that will taste like beer and be fine for doing the things the beer does to you.
And you can tell that it's a bit of a unicorn in the making, just like the T-14.
Yeah, and it's fine.
All right, sorry, a couple of other things I forgot about the T-14. With the redesigned turret, you've got greater gun depression and elevation, which has been an issue for Russian tanks throughout the ages with their inability to fire down hills and up hills. They have increased that, and even with the BMPPT Terminator 3. With their autocannons, for their urban combat, they're trying to mix it up and be able to say, okay, I'm no longer at threat of ATGMs coming out of the 10th story window of a building above me because I can actually elevate my guns that high. They don't have the tank version cannot do that, but the other versions, the T-15 can, I believe, with their 57mm turrets. 57mm gun turrets can actually elevate that high to be able to take out those sort of things. So that was just one thing I missed before. So I thought I'd better throw that in there.
Okay.
Now.
Yeah.
AUKUS.
You want to talk about AUKUS now? Okay.
Oh, look, let's... Oh, hang on. No, one last thing. I'd just like to shout out to... for John's 50th birthday, I got him some...
Oh, I'm so old!
My time's coming.
Thank you, mate. So it's a Kherson gin with apparently a watermelon infusion because the Ukrainians reckon their watermelons are sweeter than the Russian ones. So yeah.
I
look forward to mixing that with some tonic.
And in support of the Ukrainians' cause, it was going to. We got some.
Stay strong, Ukraine. It says, which is a sentiment we can get behind. Okay, Tasman has noted that for Russian beer we could have put vodka in VB, and I'm sure there are worse things in the world, but off the top of my head, that's one of them. Okay, AUKUS.
I try to avoid that sort of thing because it's really bad for me. Yeah.
Let's talk about the AUKUS
$368 billion.
Yeah.
Billion with a B.
Look,
for something we're not going to see for another 12. Well, we're going to be in a retirement home.
We're never going to see them. They're not going to arrive. As very intelligent people have pointed out, and I probably will write something on my Medium about it soon. This is Australia's love of announcing submarine deals without ever actually building submarines. Because our politicians can take bribes for the contracts, but they don't actually have to deliver the finished working product. And this deal is predicated on a continuity of purpose between three governments over 40 years. And
because we're never going to fall out in that time. And
it seems unlikely that three governments can maintain a continuity of purpose over that period of time. So that's a problem. There's also the problem that Australia, a country that has never operated a nuclear submarine, is apparently going to operate.
John, let's assume we're never going to either.
Yeah, no, but if we're to believe what we've been told by the full court press of the Australian media, all attending
that we need these things
around the place. Oh, it's insane.
So we need these things in order to stop to defeat China in a war.
Here's the thing that I find really difficult to understand about why we need nuclear submarines to deal with China. Yes, we need to preserve our trade routes, and this is why one has a navy. Correct. But China is where we send our stuff and where we buy our stuff from. So if they want to disrupt our trade routes, they can stop buying stuff from us and they can stop selling us stuff. So submarines don't have to get involved in China disrupting this. They've got control over that already. And
just like we don't build cars here in Australia, it's like we import all that stuff.
Yeah. So the value of these submarines is simply that we are a vassal state of the United States, and they want us to give us some of the iron ore exports to China, the cash value of that, and this is how we're doing it. But it's nuts, and if we actually wanted submarines, then for the money involved in this deal, we could build something like 50 conventional submarines, which is probably significantly more value strategically than 13/8, depending on how you cut the deal up. Nuclear submarines.
I mean, the Virginia class that we're going to get in 10 years' time will
Maybe the used
will already
ones,
be 50 years old.
No, they won't be that old because the Virginia class is quite new. But
right.
They're
out in the 80s with buddy Tom Clancy. I was reading about
that's the Los Angeles class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Virginias are newer and have a lot of maintenance problems. And our submariners, the Americans insist we call them submariners. They reckon they invented them and they would know. But we call them submariners because they are mariners in submarines.
Yep. I was about to, have they heard of the AE1 and 2? I mean,
yeah.
we were there.
Yeah.
Where were theirs?
Yes.
They didn't turn up for a number of years.
For those who don't know, the AE2 was an Australian submarine that in 1915 penetrated the Dardanelles and sank Turkish shipping in the Sea of Marmara and then got sunk. And they have found it in the last few years, and there is talk about bringing it back home.
Welcome, Kilo 19. Don't worry about being late. We're still here.
Yes, and Acroyol, hello, and Cornelius is still here. Good to see. Okay, I think that's enough about AUKUS, except to say... You got more?
Well, think about how much fun we could have if a less belligerent government got in Australia in the next 10 years, or at least had a... position of influencing decisions that were of great import within Australia, and saying, you know what, maybe we take that $368 billion and do something for Australia.
Oh, invest in education or
environment,
skills for manufacturing,
resiliency for the actual Australia, and any
health
of those
for children in remote communities,
housing, homelessness, anything like that. But no, we got to give money to billionaires overseas.
Yeah.
So wow, yeah. Anyway,
look, obviously we do a tank podcast. It's not like we're
not peaceniks.
We're not mad peaceniks who hate defence. We just kind of like to think the money could be well spent.
Yeah, We want good governance and actually good ideas and things actually being done well.
Yeah, but as you know, like Hugh White, who's a very serious strategic analyst, has said the chances are these submarines will never be built.
I agree.
There's also...
But the money is still going to get spent.
No,
the money is going to get spent. We're not going to see that money again.
Yeah, this deal is mostly about US and UK submarines basing out of Australia under the pretext that we will
we need experience to be able to have it. I mean, as if the UK is ever going to send submarines into the Pacific.
Well, they'll do what they're told by their American masters, just like we do. Okay. Anyway, moving on. I loved our discussion of the Nord Stream blowing up. Got us a rebuke on Twitter.
Really?
From a fellow who's got like 100 times our followers. So he's got a following. I can't remember who you are. I don't care. Sorry.
What's Twitter?
Anyway, he had a go at us, being like, the Seymour Hersh story on Nord Stream's been rebutted, and even what's this got to do with tanks? And it's like, I'm sorry, the causes of a war involving lots of tanks. Is well within our remit, and we believe, and we've seen nothing to contradict it, that the Nord Stream pipeline is a very big part of why this war is being fought. So, sorry about that. Anyway, the reason I've got the bad guys graphic going on up there...
I haven't watched that one yet.
No, I haven't watched it either, but is faced with the accusation that the Americans blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
No, that would never. They've manufactured.
The question raises then, well, who did it? And the intelligence services have come up with a great story, Rob.
It
was a random Eastern European criminal gang just decided to do it for kicks.
I thought they were supposed to be Russian operatives who supported Ukraine. Is one of the things I saw.
Yeah, the Eastern European Ukraine supporting guys who had a lot of shaped charges up their sleeves just hired a boat and did it for themselves, and it had nothing to do with the geopolitical, petroleum, financial nature of the shape of our world, which is probably has a lot more to do with it than just random criminal gangs deciding they want to blow up a pipeline.
We've said in a previous podcast about the Transnistrian mafia being a new go-to bad guy in Hollywood and every other and other aspects of entertainment. So I'm assuming that's probably where they are from as well. So Transnistria being part of the concept of what's going on at the moment as well. So this Transnistrian mafia. Maybe they were behind it, John. I mean, it'd be easy enough to label them.
But I just love that we're being sold. Oh, cartoon bad guys done it because we don't want to admit we done it. Having said that, I am all open to the idea that we have not yet arrived at the truth of what happened here.
But does anybody actually want to know the truth? That is the big question.
It depends,
the whole point about Black Ops,
on what the truth is.
The whole point about Black Ops is you don't admit it, you don't acknowledge it, and you make sure all the money is covered up somewhere else that you've spent on it. So you don't publish it. That's the point. So
but I would still say I would not choose to bet against Seymour Hersh. And the laughable debunking and stories that people who are fundamentally just bootlickers are trying to put out is like, fine, whatevs. You know, if it gets you paid and helps you pay the rent and feeds your kids, then good on you. But don't call us out on it when that's what you're doing. Because, you know, we're not perfect in this podcast, but we will try and tell you the truth,
or at least tell you when we're making stuff up.
Yeah, but we will try and tell you what we understand to be the truth, and most of the mainstream media in the world won't do that. So, we have to get paid a lot more money to start lying. Now,
let's get on to Ukraine itself and activities happening
Voldemar.
Voldemar?
Was it Voldemar?
It's Bakhmut. There's still the ongoing.
Well, the fight is around Bakhmut, but I mean, it had sort of broken as we did the last episode, but we hadn't had time to look at it. I think it was Voldemar was the name of the town near Bakhmut.
It's further to the south.
Okay, but you know the Russians just
keeps streaming across the fields and getting blown up by the mines and the artillery.
Good old daylight assault over
over the
ground,
over the minefield,
over the minefield,
through the artillery.
Yeah,
and I have seen again my mate Dennis showing his videos of, you see this field here, and you see all these little white dots. Those are all the bodies. Yeah. And so he's not just highlighting all the dead tanks, which they've already shown many, many times. He's saying these are all the bodies just scattered around this open field that the Russians keep trying to assault through. You really got to say, what are they thinking to do this time and time and time again? Because they're not stopping. So obviously somebody's been given the KPI, you must take Volodar and by the end of the month, and I don't care what it takes, you're going to do that. And somebody say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to send all these 19-year-old men across those fields in vehicles that are just going to get blown up and their bodies are going to get scattered all around the place and in daylight. You think, how can you do that these days?
Look, there is a legitimate military purpose, if it's executed properly, of doing the frontal assault, which is called demonstrating, right? So you make some guys look like they're going to do the frontal assault, so the enemy concentrates their defences, and then you strike at their flanks, or you get in completely behind them. These are sensible things to do. But to do the frontal assault over open ground across a minefield in broad daylight
again and again
with no actual flanking attack or anything else is just.
I mean, you could say
it's just murder. It's just killing people for no reason.
Could say it's going for the Hague approach of, as in General Hague, and of one, tying up enemy resources, and two, so they have to be in that position, and two, well, we've got more, so whatever we do just depletes theirs. But I don't think there's any loss on the Ukrainian side as they're doing these attacks.
I mean, there is a lot of criticism at the moment of Zelensky's determination to hold Bakhmut because it's become as talismanic for him as it has for the Russians.
But so was the last town that was encircled and surrounded by the Russians. In this case of, and they did a great job there until the last minute, where they should have got out 3 days earlier. And that's what's going to. They need to have learned from that with Bakhmut to say,
timing is everything.
yeah, timing is everything. And saying, okay, we can hold out until here, or we can get out now and say, we can hold out until a certain date and lose 50% of the forces we've got in there, or we can get out now and save 90% of the forces that we've got in there. And yes, we lose that, and we fall back to our next prepared positions and take a little bit of a hit on the ego. Take the hit on the ego, guys. It's not. You're going to get far more from having the people and the resources. To my mind, propaganda. You're winning the propaganda war. This propaganda, a hit to your propaganda in Bakhmut is not going to be as much of as you would as if you lost there and lose the troops.
Yeah,
my personal thoughts.
Mao, who. Mao was not a perfect leader, but he was certainly a very successful one. Always said, land can be retaken, lives cannot. There's something to be considered there, particularly for a small country like Ukraine, locked in a conflict with a very large country like Russia. I would counsel the Ukrainians to be very careful about expending lives where they don't need to. And also, I mean, you mentioned Haig. He's a bit controversial in this town.
John has thoughts on him, and we've shared them before.
We have a very large park called Haig Park, which people want renamed, and there's a lot of fighting that goes on in this town about that. And I personally think that Haig is misunderstood and misrepresented, and was someone in a very difficult position doing their best would be my personal assessment of Haig. I don't think he was a butcher, but I also think Haig would probably not have tried to hold on to Bakhmut. He would have said, what's the point of this?
My thoughts on him, did he value the people that he was using for his ends? And if he didn't, and my feelings were that he, and look, I've got no great insight into it, but the way he conducted himself is, to my mind, says he did not value the resources he had, and he used them. He spent them in a way that cost lives when they didn't need to be. Hello, Ian. We have. Hello. Hello. We're trying to sneak. Yes, we have.
Yeah, there's a dog introducing itself to the podcast.
Again.
Sorry, to the video. They're not going to be in the podcast. Yes. Anyway, let's shelve Haig because aside from bringing the tanks in 1916, he's not that relevant to tanks. Are there other things you want to talk about, Rob?
All right. Leopard 2s. Leopard 2s coming to Ukraine.
Okay.
They're there now. They are there now. The Polish Leopard 2s have been brought into Ukraine. They are deployed behind the front lines, supposedly, from what I've heard, and they are ready for whatever offensive that the Ukrainians might undertake. The Abrams and Challengers are still on the way, but again, these. Will we see the day where we've got the Leopard 2 versus the T-14 Armata? These things actually might happen in the next month between now and the next podcast. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on.
I'm willing to concede that Leopards may be used in Ukraine in the next month. I don't think we'll see T-14s in numbers because they don't exist.
I don't think I will see them in any numbers, but they might turn up. They might make an appearance just because if the Western Uber tanks are making an appearance, then why would the Russians not make an appearance with their new advanced tank and try and make at least a propaganda stunt of having them out there? And if there's any chance of destroying a Leopard 2 or an Abrams or a Challenger 2 anywhere along the front line for the Russians, by saying that there was a T-14 out there somewhere, they would be able to say that, well, there's a possibility that it took it out, and therefore the opportunities for their overseas sales to say our tanks are better than theirs. Why don't you buy our tanks? I mean, there's
the Russians need a win.
They do.
They desperately need a win. And
the thing is, if they can get a win without the T-14 and then throw it in there, and then use propaganda to say it was there and it was involved, then why not? Why wouldn't you?
That's the biggest thing is, the Russians have had 40 odd years now of every combat involving their gear versus Western gear being like the Russian gear is junk. They need, if they want to keep selling into the export market, to actually be able to point to our stuff is good. Our stuff can work. Particularly if they're going to try and sell the T-14 and the whole family of vehicles at $5 million each, it's got to be able to show some combat effectiveness. And at the moment, they don't have a lot to point to. And, it's scary how small the Russian economy is because, there's been a lot of things
going on. They're still making
on.
Millions of dollars a day by shipping out oil
and gas. But their whole economy is only worth the same as Australia's. And we are a country of... literally below 1/10 the population. Russians have got like 300 million, and we've got
they're dropping. They've dropped significantly.
Yeah, they're dropping, but it's still a very. I mean, it's geographically huge, and it's populationally quite large, and it's also here in Australia. We should be asking ourselves questions like, well, if we've got the same GDP as Russia, why can't we afford some things? Sorry, I'm just going to let this dog outside.
Because she says she's had enough of this conversation and she wants something else to happen.
Let's go.
I think we're at the point, John, we're going to say wrap it up there for the T-14. Unless you've got something else we want to go to?
Here I am. Yes, I think we have done what we're going to do.
Now, we're going to address the poll. Which was, is the T-14 any good?
Yes.
Now, this poll has gone up and down throughout the podcast, so it's been really impressive to see the number of people voting.
Democracy in action.
It is, and where do we end up?
Throughout the history of the poll, it has said the T-14 is not any good, but it has gone up and down a lot, and we've had 23 votes, and 61% saying no, it is not any good. I would somewhat disagree there in that if the Russians actually built out the complete fleet of all the variants and in their thousands, the concept as a whole is pretty good. But if you're not going to build out the whole concept with the thousands of vehicles, with that complete family of vehicles, then what you've got is a compromised vehicle that, this is not
they're not committing. They're not committing to the idea.
But I'd also say it's not an ideal tank design. It's a good tank as part of a family of vehicles, but if it's just sitting there on its own, then like I said, things like the crew sitting in the little row of three is not what you do in an ideal design. So it's that they either have to build the whole thing or not. So yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much for listening to Totally Tanked and the T-14 Armata. We'll be back next month with a new tank. And take care all and stay safe.
I think we might... We're not committing to it.
No. Oh, don't. Just leave the anticipation for next month.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks all.
Okay. Seriously, thank you folks who've been watching us on the live stream for sticking with us for the last 2 hours. It's amazing that we've got people wanting to do that, and
we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and of course, we also really appreciate all our listeners on the podcast
and our Patreons.
Oh, shit.
new ones.
Yes, the patrons. Let's actually do the patrons. So, we've got a new top tier patron. Cornelius has joined us on that.
And now he says he will come and join us if he gets to make cocktails, which we could make some.
We have issues there.
There might be a lot of this going on.
Yeah. So Fartmaster, of course, has joined us in the recording of the last podcast. And Cornelius is our new artificer level patron. And look, we don't demand that you give us money to enjoy the podcast because we're not those kind of assholes. But it definitely does help, and we really do appreciate it. And thank everyone who can put their hand in for a couple of dollars a month. So thank you, folks.
Hope you enjoyed it.
DHK, we haven't heard from you before. Just thank us for the stream. So thank you, DHK. Okay.
Take care all, and stay safe for the next month, and we'll see you then for something new.